Why do you think that misogyny should be regarded as a hate crime?
I think there's two really important reasons why we should regard misogyny as a hate crime. The first is that it gives women a language to talk about what has happened to them, and it gives us a reason to say that we are not going to put up with it anymore. You know, my experiences are not rare, they're incredibly common. Most women will have experienced street harassment, they will have experienced these kind of comments, and yet we just put up with it. We've accepted it as normal, we accept it as part of being a woman in public space. But if we name it, if we give it...
You've already named it. It's called street harassment. Wow, man.
Stella Creasy, would it be useful to consider misogyny a hate crime?
Well, right now there's a gap in how we treat various characteristics that we think should be protected in society. So if you are harassed in your workplace as a woman, actually there is protection for it, but not on our streets or indeed in our courts. And today what we're discussing in Parliament is what people are calling the upskirting bill. The fantastic campaigner Gina Beanie's done an amazing job getting that piece of legislation to Parliament.
Bear in mind this video is old, and as far as I'm aware, the upskirting ban has now come into effect. But it was originally turned down in Parliament because of what this woman was pushing for, and that was the misogynistic element in regards to upskirting. Which is kind of funny now listening back to this video purely for that fact, because at the end of the day upskirting is pretty perverted, and I was pretty surprised there wasn't already a law in place to prevent it from happening. But to suggest that it was misogyny that was the sole reason as to why people would participate in something such as upskirting is pretty absurd. But notice the word use here, and it's the same every single time one of these women advocates for misogyny to become a hate crime, like they're doing yet again as of today, which I'll come to after this. They keep talking about harassment or unwanted advances or wolf whistling, and it's talk about shifting the goalposts in terms of the definition of misogyny is. Harassment is not what would be considered to be misogyny, considering misogyny is to have some eternal hatred for women. You did what you did because you hate women. So harassing a woman or shouting abuse at a woman or wolf whistling at a woman wouldn't necessarily have been done out of a hatred. So in order to pass misogyny as a hate crime law and have the justification being something pretty mundane and irrelevant for all intents and purposes, really does open the door for exploitation in terms of not only demeaning what misogyny means, but really having a open playing field for women left, right and centre to just decide whether or not any incident that happens to them, no matter how mundane or how severe, and it has to have been due to misogyny. It's very dangerous, if I'm honest.
That piece of legislation to Parliament, but upskirting doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens in a society, and we've got so much research on this now, where young women especially are facing constant harassment, of which upskirting is just one example of it. And it happens because sadly there are some men, and let me be very clear, I'm standing up for the reputation of men, because the vast majority of men don't do this, don't behave like this towards women, but there are some men.
That's why you and many like you were not in favour of making misandry a hate crime at the same time as this woman will inevitably in the next few seconds show her true colours.
Think of women as something that they can play with, that are there for their entertainment, they are hostile to, they are prejudiced towards, and therefore they...
Now, you see, because misogyny is supposed to be an eternal hatred of women, that's really up for contention whether or not any incident in question happened as a result of misogyny. So for you to just point blank say that every single event that happens to women, it's because of prejudice towards them, it's just your way of trying to manipulate the narrative in favour of acceptance for misogyny to become a hate crime. There's some men out there that are assholes, and there's probably a few, out of that few men, there's probably an even fewer amount that do what they do because of misogyny or misogynistic reasons. But for most men, or it's got nothing to do with that. It can't, and it's a very difficult thing to prove. So if anything, is nothing but a power grab and another way to shit on men.
I think it is acceptable to follow women down the street and harass them, to try and touch them, to take pictures of them. And what I often worry about is, well, does it stop there? Are these people escalating?
Again, none of that has got any relevancy to misogyny. Anyway.
That kind of horrible behaviour is motivated by misogyny.
Well, this is what we're looking for in these amendments, is to be able to give the courts, where there is evidence, and what we've seen in Nottinghamshire is when you start recording that evidence, it changes the conversation about violence against women, about things like stalking, about harassment, to be able to take that into account. So, for example, if you had somebody...
crimes anyway, for fuck's sake.
...who had created a website where they were encouraging people to take these pictures, taking them themselves, talking about women in a certain way, showing hostility, ill will. The law doesn't have a formal definition of hostility, but it does, in the same way that it has in terms of someone's hostility towards someone who has a religious background or their racial background. So at the moment we do say where somebody shows a clear pattern of behaviour tackling people because of their religious background or their racial background, actually we should be able to take that into account.
And presumably...
What I'm looking forward to do is to treat these things equally.
Right.
Oh, so if a man happens to be perverted, then it must be misogyny. Okay.
Talking of equally, presumably you're also next going to campaign for misandry to be made a hate crime.
Well, what I'm doing is saying right now the equalities legislation that we have in this country says that we want to protect, that we say that sex characteristics in particular are an issue. Actually, frankly, what I want is a review of the whole of hate crime, and that's why organisations like Refuge and Tell Mama, who work with the Muslim community, and Dimensions, who work with disabled people, and Stonewall are backing this as well, because I don't think our hate crime legislation works for us right now. And the law...
How many identity politics tick boxes does she just rattle off there? Tell Mama, that's Muslims or minorities even. Obviously racism by default. And Stonewall, that's for the LGBT. So if she got her way, that'd be misogyny as well. It's every demographic covered really, is it not? Bar one.
So
and that would include issues around sex and gender,
right? Including hatred and prejudice towards men.
Well, I think they would have to look at that.
Oh, they'd have to look at it, but you see how she malfunctions. It's every single time you watch a video or you read an article with a woman like this, it's always the same. They start to malfunction when the questions are posed that are polar opposite to what they're saying.
But what we're very clear on from the evidence from Nottinghamshire is when we recognise that there are a small group of men out there who have a hostility towards women, and that is leading to, the figures are horrific when you think about it, 2/3 of women having to change their behaviour because of that hatred and harassment from men. This is 2018.
Hatred, again, you can't prove that.
It shouldn't be for young women to have to live their lives in fear. It should be for these people to be stopped and to make sure that we have equality and freedom for everyone.
Okay.
So it comes in the wake of, yet again, the campaigners and MPs calling for misogyny to become a hate crime. No mention of misandry, that seems to be dead and buried. It comes after it was revealed that gender hate incidents were at least as common as any hate crime recorded by police. There were 67,000 such incidents last year, with 57,000 of them targeted at women, according to figures from the Crime Survey of England and Wales. People aged between 16 and 44 were most commonly targeted. Right? But notice the word used here, hate incidents, because at the end of the day, no matter how big and conflated they make the numbers to make their point seem more shocking, it doesn't really cut any ice with many people, including myself, because a hate incident, as we all know, is any action considered to be a hate incident when the victim or anyone else thinks what happened to them as a result of any sort of prejudice. And as you just heard there from that woman in the video prior, it's a lot of the time incidents that happen to them, whether it be a man shouting obscenities, whether it be wolf whistling or anything mundane in that regard, they think it's misogyny. Therefore, if they had their way, that would become a hate crime. And not only that, just because you feel like an incident happened to you out of some form of prejudice and you report it to the police, there's a big difference between you reporting it to the police and what you have reported resulting in somebody or people getting charged as a result of that. It's very difficult to prove that an incident happened as a result of a hate crime. It'd be very difficult to prove that an incident happened as a result of misogyny. But it doesn't stop the statistics, or in this case what the charity have unveiled, propping up their numbers, because the numbers of reports, and that is reports, that doesn't mean confirmed charges. It's nothing more than a report, a mere report. It gets added to the tally, the overall tally. So it's very easy for it to seem as if there's a rampant rise in all the terrors within our society in regards to misogyny, when in reality it's just women that have phoned the police and reported incidents because they feel like an incident happened to them as a result of hostility or prejudice. And you give the power like that into the hands of the modern day feminist type, and quite clearly you can see why not only could this open the door to exploitation, but it also opens the door to exaggeration. Gender was the motivation for more than half of the hate crimes women reported experiencing last year. Age, which is also not recorded by most police forces, was the second most common, with 41,000 incidents, following race with 16,000. The letter argues that women are being left unprotected by police forces' failure to include misogyny and hate crime recording. Women are targeted with the harassment on the street and online on an everyday basis, it states. Accepting this as normal creates an environment in which 1 in 5 women have experienced sexual assault, and each week 2 women are murdered by a partner or ex. Just how you think you're able to link domestic violence, or in terms of murder, to that of misogyny and the desperate need to make it a hate crime is beyond me, considering people that are going to murder someone, they know fine well that murdering is illegal anyway, but they're going to do it regardless. So again, I think it's safe to assume that this is nothing more than a power grab, because anything substantial in regards to anything that could be threatening, or in many cases life-threatening towards a woman, they are all crimes. They're protected in those regards, from harassment, stalking, to sexual harassment, or in the cases of what they're trying to say here, murdering or domestic violence. There are all laws and crimes, etc., in place for these things. So it just leaves misogyny in the abyss of irrelevancy. Sam Smethers, the Fawcett Society's chief executive, said the letter's signatories recognised the resource pressure police were under, but the rising tide of hatred against women had to be taken seriously. What is it with these far left fanatics and these socialists and all the rest of it? They all seem to be. It doesn't matter what category of people we're talking about. It doesn't if it's minorities, or if it's the LGBT, or in this case women. There's always a rising amount of hatred towards them. There's always this growing tension, this desperate need to which more often than not is derived from nothing other than fabrication, in order to justify whatever laws, legislation / bills that they've got in place, in order to further protect them, in order to further push them forward in society. A rising hate of women. That's an absolute joke. But of course, this is coming from the same sort of people that think women are an oppressed class in society. So, this date should be a wake-up call to all of us, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. We have to recognise how serious misogyny is. It's at the root of violence against women and girls. Is it aye? What about women that are violent to men? And it doesn't matter if it doesn't happen at the same rate in terms of statistics. It still happens. So when a woman is violent to her partner, is she doing that because she hates men? Or what happens in homosexual partners? If a man is domestically violent towards his partner and they're both homosexual, is he doing that because he hates men? Or is it more safe to assume that there's violent tendencies there? Not to mention, most men that are violent towards women in their house or wherever it may be are pretty cowardly, weak-minded, with a violent streak. I wouldn't say they're doing what they do because they hate women. You have to prove that. You can't just assume. But these assumptions are what is leading the way for you to be able to try and get this to be passed. And that's what's concerning. Katie Goss, the chief executive of Women's Aid, said forces who had introduced the recording of misogyny had not seen an influx in reporting of wolf whistling, but an increase in reports of serious sexual harassment and assault. How convenient. It is clear that recognising misogyny as a hate crime gives survivors greater confidence that our criminal justice system will treat all forms of violence against women and girls more seriously. That's why we are supporting calls for police chiefs to back treating misogyny as a hate crime. Well, I'm fine with that if you're going to make misogyny one too. But at the end of the day, the more hate crime laws and legislations that they put in place, the more our society turns into some fucking police state authoritarian BS. And if it was up to me, this would be ignored, as it should be, because it sets a very dangerous precedent. But time will tell. Wouldn't surprise me if it comes into effect. Nonetheless, video's far too long. Apologies. Peace.